Good evening, and I want to echo what Jeff said. It is volunteers. I met Mary just a minute ago, and Mary told me she actually came to Joplin and helped with our recovery for 30 days after our tornado. Our tornado, and I'll get into my PowerPoint, but thank you, Mary, on behalf of everybody from Joplin. Every time I meet someone, and you know, I was just in Chicago for vacation, and of course, they're like, Joplin, that sounds familiar, and I'm like, yeah, tornado. I mean, because it's been my life, and once you've had a disaster, it really does define who you are. But again, Mary came up and said, I came to your community and I helped. So volunteers are absolutely the most important thing. I was just visiting with the news anchor man, and I said, you know, it wasn't just national volunteers, but we had people come internationally to Joplin, and it just brings you to tears when you think people dropped what they were doing, drove to Joplin, flew to Joplin, you know, whatever it took, they were willing to help. And the question came was, what's the good out of a disaster? And the kindness of another human being, if you ever question it after a disaster, I mean, something's wrong, because I have just been restored in the faith of what humans are. I'm a social worker by training. I've been a social worker 30 years. I go by the name Renee. I do have a doctorate degree, but can I show them Gina and Richard? I came without socks on today. That's the kind of person I am. So all my clothes, I wore my clothes in Chicago and driving down here, and my kids were like, Mom, you got to get a pair of socks. And I said, it's my friends. That if you're in emergency management, if you're a volunteer, you get me. We're going to be okay without socks. So anyway, that's the kind of person I am. I had never been involved in a disaster in my life. My husband is a fireman and an emergency responder. He does that for a living. When our tornado hit, we lived about a mile from the tornado zone south of Joplin, and so he immediately responded, and I didn't see him for a couple days, really probably closer to 4 or 5 days, and I knew that I could not do that immediate response. That is not me. I would be in the corner sucking my thumb in the fetal position, screaming, I want my mommy. So I knew after about 3 weeks that there was going to be, I had some gifts that I could help with the long-term recovery of a community. And so I went to a meeting unbeknownst to me of this thing called a long-term recovery committee. It was at our local Red Cross office, and they just said, anybody that's interested. And I thought, well, surely a social worker, there's something I can do. And lo and behold, within that period of time, I became the chairperson of our long-term recovery committee, and did that until we demobilized, which was about 2.5 years after the tornado. So about 5 months ago, we demobilized and folded back into what you guys call VOAD, we call it our COAD, which is our county organizations. So in some ways, what I'm going to talk about is that episode between May 22nd, 2011 to the demobilization of our long-term recovery committee. But I also want to give some backstory about why our long-term recovery committee was so worked so well. And that is, we had a strong foundation with what was called our COAD. Our county, Owensboro is very similar to Joplin. We have 48,000 people in our town proper. Our county is, we sit right on a county line, but the large county called Jasper County has a metropolitan area of about 250,000, so a little bit bigger than your guys' metropolitan area as I was reading it on the way down. But very much we're the hub of, we had 2 hospitals, 1 shopping center. Everybody came to town to eat because we had the chain food restaurants. And so very similar, and that county had the hindsight and foresight to start a COAD after another event. So in 2003, we had a large tornado go through, started in the state of Kansas. We're like 2 miles from the state of Kansas and the state of Oklahoma. So just if you don't know where Joplin is. And we had a tornado bounce through parts of our northern part of our county. It did not hit Joplin proper. And from that event, people started talking about needing this thing called a COAD or a VOAD. But it was slow getting started. And then unfortunately, that was 2003. And in 2008, we had another event. And that really mobilized people to say, really, we need to get a functioning COAD, letters of memorandums of understanding, bylaws. Let's have a chairperson. Let's meet monthly. Let's figure out what we're doing. And so when we had this event in 2011, that structure was there. I had never been involved in any of that, so I walked in and I just thought everything was magical. Looking back, it was really pivotal to think about that foundation. It really took us 2 small events for us to formalize, and thank God we did, because that third event, which I'll talk about now, was large. Any questions? And you guys just interrupt me. I'm pretty casual. Okay, well, so that first picture became kind of iconic in, I think, the nation as well as in our town. This was the one and only high school we had, and it was right at the epicenter of our tornado. The tornado happened May 22nd on a Sunday afternoon at 5:41 p.m. Our high school graduating class of about 600 kids had graduated. Fortunately, it was not in this building. It was at our university about 5 miles away. They got let out of the graduation event about 5:30. And so 11 minutes later, a tornado, as people were driving into town from driving west, we had a tornado coming from the west. It was rain wrapped, so many people just saw it as rain and continued to drive. And so there was multiple casualties just based on that. And unfortunately, I'm a mother today. Oh, I was then too. Any of you guys that are parents out there, unfortunately, as you know, many teenagers want to drive their own car, and their parents drive their own car, and the grandparents drive. And so many families were separated during this tornado because everybody was in separate cars, not sure which roads they were taking to where they were going back to. So that was kind of some of that early, oh my gosh, how do we connect families together? Who knows who's at the hospital, not at the hospital? So if you don't know the facts, it was an EF5 tornado, 1 mile wide, 12 miles long, 8,000 homes, 400 businesses, 18,000 automobiles, and eventually 161 people. Again, the size of Owensboro. Every one of us that lived in Joplin knew at least one person who expired from this. What we heard early on from FEMA and some of the other people was the model, the national recovery model that VOAD puts out, this thing called the long-term recovery model, disaster case management, all of those things, was going to be a little different in Joplin because about 60% of the homes that were damaged were rental properties. And the model nationally is helping homeowners to get back in their homes. And so what we had, our town was founded on coal mines, and so what we had was a lot of little shotgun houses that, I don't know how to describe them otherwise, but you walk in and it's a living room, living room, kitchen, and then a bedroom and a bathroom. And these sold or rented for sometimes close to $300 a month. I mean, cost of living in Joplin pre-tornado was pretty sweet. Those houses will never be seen again. The owners, the landlords, took whatever they got from their homeowner or their insurance, and they knew that to rebuild they would have to pay or charge rent $700 or $800. And so I'm a social worker. I've already told you that. This is one of the greatest things that gives me angst still today. Is a lot of our working class people, as a community, we've said we want Joplin to be built back better than ever. Everybody's welcome to the table. But quite frankly, the working class people have been priced out of the market. And we have a lot of small bedroom communities. But I find that I still want to fight the fight for the people who are pouring my coffee at McDonald's, who are sweeping my floor at the public school system, whatever it is, that they should have a place at our table as well. So we've been kind of studied by the national because we had so many renters versus homeowners, and most benevolence that came to town really focuses on getting homeowners. They want an assurance that the house is owned by that person, that the rebuild is going to be there forever. And so we really were challenged by people who were really renting properties. This is day one. I don't know if you guys want to see all these things. So anyway, that's what Joplin looked like for miles and miles and miles. What I love about this picture is you can already start identifying the benevolence. The green shirt man is Catholic Charities of Southern Missouri. They had not had a presence in Joplin, but today they have a full-time staff that's staying in Joplin, committed to social services post-tornado. We've really kind of gotten all the disaster work done. But I love that about they came to town and saw that there is still a need that they can serve really the homeless population in town. And you can see a few of the other shirts that just represent the benevolence that came to town. This looks like Richard, our your guys' emergency manager guy. You see all of his radios. He's got them all on his waistband. Sorry, Richard.
You don't have this, though, does he?
Well, he didn't get to eat at the barbecue place yet. You need to invite him down. So if you're not familiar with kind of the stages of disaster response, forgive me if you already know this, but again, this was my first rodeo, and so it was really helpful. Again, I have a husband who's a fireman, and he was all into the rescue. And in Joplin, that did begin immediately. Again, it was 5:41 on a Sunday night. I think everybody was shocked by all of our neighbors helping each other. As the benevolent community came in, Samaritan's Purse, all these places came in to help us. A lot of people with gashes on their head or without shoes or without a house would say, no, go on down, help somebody else. There's got to be somebody worse off than I am. And that kind of, it's a Midwest story. You guys know that from a town like yourself. It's that story that surely I shouldn't be the first in line to get the help. There's somebody worse off than me. And so we saw a lot of the rescue happening pretty quickly. At that time, myself, and I have a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, we were with my husband who was setting up a command center outside the disaster zone to kind of coordinate all the, what do you guys call that? Mutual aid that came to town. And so we had no sense really of the destruction because we were without electricity, we were without radio communication except for the handheld emergency responder radios. We did not have TV, we did not have cell phones, none of that was happening, and so it was very, very spotty. And again, you assume, like when they said, oh, that high school's been destroyed, we're like, oh, people are overreacting, like one brick may have fallen off. And so imagine kind of the devastation and horror the next morning when my kiddos left the command center and drove kind of peripheral around the tornado, and to realize, the devastation, the destruction. Huge. Anyway, rescue is that immediate stuff. Relief. On May 22nd, Mary talked about our Red Cross developed a shelter at our local university. They had just signed a memorandum of understanding 2 weeks prior. The university had never really been in emergency preparedness or emergency management, but a new person went out and talked to the university, and they said, let's formalize this, and the Red Cross made that structure in place, and 2 weeks later they used that structure for up to 5 weeks, I believe. I think they were out at the university for 5 weeks. We had pods, points of distribution immediately. You all sent us water. The whole world sent us water. We are so glad for the water. The used clothing, the teddy bears, some of those things. There is such an initial response to respond. Philip told me he's from the Katrina area, the New Orleans area. About 9 months after our disaster, we decided to drive to, me and a group of other people drove to New Orleans because we wanted to figure out how to do recovery. And 7 years after Katrina, the kindness of us driving to their town, really picking their brain, they were so kind to us. They're so grateful. In any disaster, you're so grateful for whatever it takes. However, at some point, clothing became its own animal, and trying to store it and inventory it and trying to keep track of it almost became a full-time job for our volunteers. But we did have lots of water. These points of distribution is kind of a language that the national VOAD uses, and we had people, medical personnel throughout the disaster with tents, giving out tetanus shots, checking on people, dehydration. Lots of that kind of intense thing happened the very next day. We had one of our hospitals was devastated. We had a 7-story hospital that took a direct hit from the tornado. And I was telling Richard and Gina at lunch or supper tonight, 2 blocks to the south was our other hospital. And had the tornado just shifted, we would have been without both of our medical centers. As bad as it was, we were without the larger of the 2 medical centers. And so we had a memorial hall, kind of an old concert venue, memorial hall, and they set up a triage station there immediately. We had a temporary morgue right next to the Red Cross shelter out at the university. There was a little bit of publicity. Is there a coroner or anybody in the... Anyway, there was a little bit of publicity that our coroner was overwhelmed. I don't want to say mismanaged, because I would not want to second guess what anybody was doing. but would not let people for, I think it was close to 5 to 7 days, check to see if their deceased person could they identify. He was trying to get everything organized. And so there was some concerns and confusion that wasn't happening fast enough for people's own, resolution. And then the AmeriCorps people came pretty quickly, and we started a volunteer coordination. I would have to say, if you guys are in a large-scale disaster, that's one of the most important things, is have one place that all volunteers go and sign up and register and get assignments and screen out and all that. Is that a good answer, Shannon? Oh, okay.
Something you've been working
on. Oh, okay. So important. And there will always be outliers. There'll be people that never like one point of service. We had lots of the Wild West show is what I call it, kind of renegades. Well, you can come here and volunteer. We don't care who you are. And you come here and we'll pay your bills. And, they didn't like the bureaucracy. And quite frankly, I'm not a big bureaucracy person either. But in large-scale disaster, you have to have some sense of coordination, or it can be anarchy in some ways. And even the helpers can get that way. Like I want it to be. We had a couple churches that weren't going to fold into this thing called the Long-Term Recovery Committee. They were going to do it their own way. And it just causes confusion because then there's multiple sources of information being sent out. And once we had a coordinated volunteer center, all of that kind of died down. And then recovery, which is what I want to speak about, really began a month to the day, June 22nd. Again, this is the model that VOAD has, and I assume you guys have those manuals, the national manuals. That was my only playbook. Again, I became the chairperson, and I would touch base with my husband and say, what do you think? Because he was a fireman, so he'd tell me, a few things. Anyway, so this is Joplin Area Long-Term Recovery Committee. We made a logo, we made a mission statement, and at our height, we had 120 organizations. We signed memorandums of understanding. So we had some for our COAD, as it was standing up. Normally, traditionally, our COAD had letters of agreement, articulation agreements. But as people came to the Long-Term Recovery Committee meetings, we also had an MOU, and I can share this with anybody. I didn't bring them with me. But basically saying you can't be here for proprietary reasons. So anybody owns a for-profit business that you would sell tornado shelters, and you want a list of all the people that we're helping in case management, you're out of bounds. We're not going to let you do that. And we had that situation come up. And they were like, but we'll sell them cheaper than we normally would. You're out of bounds. We're not going to give you a list of new customers. That's not who we are. So our memorandum of understanding really articulated conflicts of interest, financial conflicts of interest, and that we were really a democracy, that majority rules when it came down to votes, and I just kind of shared a little bit of that. We had a memorandum of understanding for organizations, and then every individual also signed one. So we had 2 different MOUs. And like I said, at our height, we had about 120 organizations. And at times, our meetings would be close to 80 to 90 people. We met every Thursday at 2 o'clock. God knows why we picked that time, but that's the time we picked. And the construction workers, the FEMA representatives, the state emergency, everybody would drop what they were doing. Usually they'd drop at about noon. We'd all go chew the fat for a couple hours, and then we'd have a meeting at 2, and we'd eat cookies and such, and then we'd call it a day. So maybe that wasn't a bad idea, I don't know. But we met weekly for a long period of time, over a year or a year and a half. I know I put it on the green sheet, I can't remember now. But we met weekly at the exact same time, at the exact same place, with the exact same agenda. And I think those things are really important, again, after you've been through a large-scale disaster, to have some normalcy and some rhythm to life. The one thing I got out of the NOVAD literature more than anything else is what they call the 4 C's. And that a functional, whether you guys call it your VOAD, a functional working group has cooperation, communication, coordination, and collaboration. Well, Joplin's not to be outdone. We added a 5th C, and it's called celebration. And I think that's one of the things that we intentionally did almost every time we could, was we remembered where we were at in the recovery, but we also celebrated every new homeowner's new house. Every time somebody demobilized from our town, we had a big party. The AmeriCorps people were the first people to leave our community, and they were so valuable to us. And we had a send-off with many, many tears. We bought T-shirts for them, and we wrote all over their T-shirts. And I think that's significant because when you're going through a large-scale disaster anyway, there's a lot of grief and loss. There's a lot of heavy heart. And so if you can acknowledge the gifts people have brought to you, but also to acknowledge every step of the way. We had comes up here later. 586 people lived in the FEMA trailers, and the day that 584 people left the FEMA trailers, we had 2 people that did not voluntarily leave the FEMA trailers. The police had to escort them out, blah, blah, blah. But when that happened, 584 families, I said people, it was families. We did that in less than 23 months. That was a huge celebration. FEMA told us that wasn't even possible. Of course, they, wanted to renegotiate the contract. We could only have the trailers for a year. Then it was 18 months. And actually, it was 18 months because we didn't get the trailers till November of 2011. And then they left May 1st of 2013. So right before our 2-year anniversary. We felt like we were rock stars. Every family that we helped and every family felt so appreciated and valued because what we accomplished. So those celebrations are really important. Again, we had about 1,600 families sign up and enroll in this thing called FEMA that then converts over to disaster case management. We were one of the first projects that actually could get funding to hire disaster case managers. So we had 23 new case managers in town under a new thing called disaster case management, and maybe they hadn't even worked in social services before. And so there was a lot of training for those case managers. We had 3 entities who employed those people, and that was the American Red Cross, Salvation Army, and Catholic Charities. The funding did come through FEMA to our state emergency management, and then they had a oversight organization, and then the money fueled down to these 23 case managers. Myself and another volunteer, at the time that the tornado hit, I worked for a university. I was a professor of social work, and so I had a little free time. That's a joke if you know any university professors. There's a lot of free time. Anyway, there really is. Does anybody work for a university? Oh, sorry.
I'm not a professor.
Yeah, oh, okay. I'm giving up the secret. No, anyway, I did have some free time. Obviously, this hit May 22nd. Our semester was over. And so I did have a lot of time, and I volunteered extensively. I switched jobs about a year after the tornado, and I work for our public school system now under some federal grants to help our kids restabilize their emotional and social life. So it's a groovy thing. But one of the things I did early on with one of my co-chair people of the Long-Term Recovery Committee was we decided to have what we called disaster case management breakfast, coffee and crumpets with disaster case managers. And we did this every other week. It's not a bad thing to do even if you have a lot of social service kind of people in town, but because we had 23 people come into town to help them understand entitlement programs versus disaster programs, versus who's eligible for what, or how you get around in our town. We don't have a public transportation system per se. We have a little trolley that runs like 8 o'clock to 6 o'clock. Good luck if you need something in between times kind of thing. So we brought people together, and this is an example. We had quite a few people come to these meetings. And just as you guys are today, yes?
So that looks like more than 23 people. So who else was involved in this?
Thank you for asking. I just say, just as you all come and socialize, people love coming to this. We had some of the FEMA, we also had probably 10 FEMA employees, VALs, I think is what they called them, that stayed with us, and then some housing specialists until the trailers moved out. They came to these meetings. We had a large faith-based, volunteer base of our own faith community in town. And they just committed. They just kept coming to our meetings, writing down. They were thrilled to know the social service resources as well. Public school came, like I said before. So we had a variety of people. And then the national disaster people, the National Lutherans, came all the time. That's one of the things I learned in our disaster. And so forgive me if you know all of this. But many of the churches at the national level commit to a certain kind of disaster response. I think that's so groovy. I did not know that. Who knew? The Brethren like to do the daycare, I guess. The Presbyterians like to do volunteer comfort and care. And I was like, how cool. I mean, that is just groovy to me. I mean, you know? So that all came into our town. But great question. So that is a large group. It was the 23 case managers. It was totally voluntary. And it was very similar to speed dating. We gave an agency 10 minutes. Yeah, don't nobody get comfortable, no. Anyway, we gave each agency like 10 minutes to stand up and tell us, what's your eligibility, blah, 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 blah. And we did 4 of those in an hour with cookies and crumpets and just had a great time. I had somebody from St. Louis recently call me and want to know about this model, not about disaster, but how did I get people to come, 60 plus people every other week for a long period of time? I don't know about you guys, but you say food, and I mean, there's people all over the place. I mean, Richard took me to the Grid Place or whatever it's called. I'm like, yeah, I'm there. It doesn't take much. Anyway, yeah, I'm sorry, Moonlight, yeah. Me and President Ford and President Obama. Right?
No.
Oh, gosh. Got my Democrats mixed up. Dang. I got my Democrats mixed up.
Not that far off.
Yeah. I'll digress a minute. Actually, on the 1-year anniversary of our tornado, so it was the next graduating high school class, President Obama wanted to come. Well, our graduating classes always happen on Sunday nights, and he couldn't come till Monday. So he came on Monday, May 21st, 2012, to speak at our graduating class. And there was all sorts of kibitzing about we weren't happy about moving it for the president, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I was selected as one of the people to meet privately with President Obama. And the person who, so that was on a Monday. The previous Friday, the FEMA lady from Kansas City called and said, hey, we have to do a background check, but would you like this? Well, I'm a lifelong Democrat, so that's what's bad about me screwing up my Democrats. But anyway, I'm like screaming in the phone, oh my gosh, Monday is my birthday. I love President Obama. Oh, I'm going to meet the president on my birthday. Oh. Anyway, and so my kids were like, my daughter was like, I cannot believe you. She had heard that he was coming to town for like 3 months, and she wasn't a senior, so she didn't get to meet him. Anyway, so met the president on my birthday, happened the people in the room, there was about 20 of us in this disaster work, and one of them shouted, hey, Mr. President, it's Renee's birthday. And he said, well, seems to me I ought to give her a birthday kiss. I know some of you are like Big Dip and Dill, right? My husband sides with you. We are out divided. He is a Republican. Anyway, it's the craziest thing. I mean, I was giddy with excitement, and as I laid my head down that night, the tears just poured. And that is because 161 people died in my town, or we would have never been recognized. And so the giddiness of meeting a president almost felt dirty, And that's one of the things I think we struggle with. I mean, I'll just be honest. As we help a community recover, and as Jeff said, we can't do it without volunteers. Sometimes as volunteers, it's hard to get the limelight. Sometimes you don't. Even coming here, my kids were in the back seat going, yeah, my mom speaks nationally. I'm like, no, I really don't. I just had a story about Joplin. And to keep humble about it. But anyway, long story, President Obama, yeah, whatever. I'm sure he remembers my birthday, right? Not. So one of my friends texted me the next day and said, Michelle Obama's she's got guns, she's gonna hurt you. I'm like, whatever. Anyway. Oh wait, I went too far, didn't I? These were all of our partners. We intentionally did a lot of things to publicize who was under this umbrella called Long-Term Recovery Committee. It's voluntary. All you had to do was come to meetings, sign the MOU, and be good stewards. We divided up into committees. My committee in the beginning, before I was the full chairperson, was the Crisis Counseling Committee, is what they call it in the National VOAD language. We didn't like that language, so we called it the Emotional Spiritual Support Committee. That was much more palatable to the Midwesterners that I live with. Nobody wants counseling. Nobody wants mental health. So we just called it emotional and spiritual support. We put out support group literature. We notified people when we heard about opportunities. We had a lot of national people come in and do compassion fatigue workshops for volunteers. Very, very important. On the 6-month anniversary, it was the day before Thanksgiving. We intentionally put out a lot of literature about the holidays, and as you go through the first holidays after you've lost someone or the upheaval in your life, and so we did a lot of intentional things, and I could talk all day about that, but I won't. But anyway, that was my first role, really, was trying to care for everybody's emotional and loss. We did a balloon release. We listed off all 161 names at our anniversary mark. We did a lot of things to recognize not just rah-rah as a Joplin grade, but why we were doing what we were doing because of the significant loss. So these show all the great partners we had. We made a banner actually, and we hung it up. We still have it. Our COAD has the banner, and it actually says COAD, Jasper County Community Organizations Active in Disaster, because the Long-Term Recovery Committee, we knew we would step away eventually. So everything really, was, besides our emblem, is branded under our COAD, which is like your guys'
What is
VOAD.
Convoy of Hope?
Oh, I'm sorry. Convoy of Hope actually comes out of Springfield, Missouri, but they're a national benevolence program now. They started really with food, I believe, and feed the children kind of mentality, but now they are also doing home repairs. Yeah. Yes?
And they're actually related to the Assemblies of God.
Oh.
It's their disaster arm, so it's that denomination. And working on logistics and transportation. So with that, like you said, with speed in America. I think they move trucks. They have trucks and they move things.
And you'll see them on the roads, yes.
Yeah.
And the Assembly's national office is in Springfield, Missouri, and that's where they have a couple universities there. Yes, thank you for asking. We had so many partners that we have 2 of these, and not to diss anybody, we'll do them all. So, oops, this thing's on a timer. Anyway, we wanted to give recognition for the labors that people put together. All right. JAMA, if I can say just this one real quickly up here, is our ministerial alliance in town. And previously our ministerial alliance was maybe more evangelical and quiet in terms of the community. But after the disaster, they embraced all the mainline churches and really put together a ministerial alliance that everybody felt comfortable with. Prior to the tornado, there was a pledge about some religious beliefs that Jesus Christ is the only way to get to heaven. And we had some outliers that felt that that was a little strong, and they relaxed that after the tornado. Again, there's a lot of beautiful things that happened since our tornado. We now, Saturday, we have an ecumenical panel presentation from the Muslim faith, the Jewish faith, the Baha'i faith, and the Christian faith, talking about life after death and just learning to get to know each other. And we've always had people in our town that were Muslim. We've always had people in our town that were Jewish, Baha'i faith, but they were isolated and maybe even on purpose isolated. And today we sit down and share dialogue. It's pretty groovy in our town. We're kind of the Bible Belt, so that's a really neat thing that we've done. So here's our successes. By August 2013, again, the tornado happened May 2011, so within 27 months, we only had 8 families open in the disaster case management program. So we started with 1,620 families, and we had successfully, whatever their problems were, most of it was housing, but some of it was unemployment, some of it was transportation. Child care was huge in the beginning. 40% of our child care centers were wiped out by the tornado. Some of the reasons people came into case management was also the emotional and spiritual needs that they had. Sometimes they had gone pre-tornado with mental health symptoms, but the tornado exacerbated it, and so they were in great need of things. 586 families lived. FEMA doesn't like you to call them FEMA trailers, but that's what they are. They like them to be called, is anybody here from FEMA? I really loved our FEMA people, but they got their own set of rules. Anyway, they're called temporary housing units, or THUs. And like I said, within 23 months after the disaster, we had all but 2 families moved into more permanent housing. A great success for us. Long-Term Recovery Committee was mostly known by the fact that we had a benevolence checking account, and lots and lots of funds came to us directly. We had received over $200,000, and really it's people who know about VOADs, COADs, LTRCs. They know that money is going to go. We had no expense to distribute this money. We're all volunteers, and as of this slide, we had assisted over 425 families with furnishings, transportations. We still have about $50,000 in our account we just handed that back over to our COAD and asked them to hang on to that. Yes, sir?
Who acts as your fiscal agent for that?
Funny thing, before the tornado, we were in the process of getting our 501c3 as our COAD. They hadn't accomplished it yet. And so our food pantry in town, which is called Crossline Ministries, they offered, she was our treasurer, and she offered then to put it under her fiscal agent. So anytime we gave somebody a tax receipt or a thank you note, we always wrote it from the Long-Term Recovery Committee, but we always said under the umbrella of Crossline's Churches of Joplin, and gave them their EIN number. That's a great question. And then about 9 months after the tornado, we actually became our own 501c3, and our checking account now is housed with the COAD. Our emergency manager is probably similar to your guys' Richard. All of our COAD meetings happen in our emergency manager's office, and his secretary then is taking care of the COAD checking account.
Renee,
Yes.
did you find that the two that you had to remove were homeless to start with?
Yeah, there was some circumstances unbecoming of, just life and maybe personalities that were resistant to folding into the common thread of humanity. I'm trying to be nice here. Because I believe in everybody, yay! But they were, we found them a house, but they had 5 kids and they wanted 5 bedrooms, and we only had a 3-bedroom house.
That's what you find when you're closing the shelter usually.
Yeah. And so, you bless them on their journey. And sometimes people have to learn from a lot of hard knocks. And so we don't want to prevent those hard knocks, but it is painful. And I think it's painful for volunteers if they've not worked around what I would call non-compliant families. Like I said, I've been a social worker a lot of years. And some people just aren't ready to change. And so you still just bless them. You bless them in their pain, and you say, it's great meeting you, but no, I'm not going to pay you $300. No, I'm not going to find you a 5-bedroom house, but thank you, but good luck for you. But yeah, it's hard, I think, as volunteers to think sometimes it looked arbitrary or judgmental. And a part of it is, I think after a disaster, people are more than willing to help people, but some people also have to be willing to step up. And that's,
I noticed that twice during Katrina at one time, and then another time in Texas, we came through across the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, great study in human nature and humans. Okay, so anyway, we had that money. Most people are intrigued by that, like what in the world would you buy? And so we didn't pay for construction ever because we had so much free construction. I mean, the nation came in to build our houses. But people who needed a couch, a chair, and we were pretty fiscally conservative. My counterpart and I, who actually we approved anything under $1,000, and then our executive committee, they would bring a case into our executive committee for anything over $1,000. But my counterpart and I, she's about 20 years younger than me, her litmus test was, if I did without it in college, then we don't need to pay for it. So if somebody wanted a washer and dryer, she'd say, I did without that in college. We're not paying for a washer and dryer. Now, if somebody was disabled, we would. But that was our litmus test. If somebody wanted a couch and a love seat and a Barca lounger, she'd go, I didn't have that in college. So that became our joke. And I don't, but you want to help people, but at the same time, you have donor intent. And you also have to appreciate that we never knew when the race was going to be done. And so those early ones, we just always said, we didn't advertise it, but we said $700 to $800 per family of need. We would guesstimate that's how long we could last. Again, we only helped 425 families and had some money left over. So, but that was our litmus test: is did you have it in college? No. Okay then. This is our THU. We had 2 large sites where FEMA placed their trailers right really in our airport traffic space, kind of. It was an empty land right before planes landed. We also had scattered sites, so any of our traditional trailer parks that had empty lots, FEMA paid them nicely. But this is really where the bulk of most of our residents lived. Our YMCA did a great creative thing. This is about 5 miles north of town, and they were worried, and our trolley system didn't run this far, so they were worried about mobilizing resources for these families. How are these families going to get a new job, sign up for food stamps, whatever? So they developed what we called a human service committee, and if you will, kind of a community center. But they paid for the community center to be built. It was a temporary. And then 26 agencies went out there on a daily or weekly basis and kind of had office hours. So kind of a satellite office hour. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us about the water and sanitation crisis or situation there?
You're going to make me stretch. Are you a city employee? Oh, okay. To my knowledge, I've never heard that there was that problem. And if you drive through now, you'll still see some of these small poles intermittently. All the trailers have all gone. The pads are still there, and those pipes are still there. So I did not hear of any kind of basic utility crisis.
How could you get water to a large unit like that?
I think the hand of God. I don't know. That's my answer for everything. Yeah.
I can answer that.
Oh, please do.
Because I actually staked out that trailer area.
You were?
It was a partnership with the city. I mean, they had to build the infrastructure. So that was why it took a little bit of time to get the trailer park there. But all the infrastructure was put into place. So it was connected into the city water and city sewer system, which may still exist.
The pipes are still there. I know.
The light poles and all that, it wasn't an empty field. It was essentially an empty field. So think about development. And anytime a developer goes in, you've got to put the infrastructure in. Now, that was FEMA supported through catastrophic housing plans and things, but that's what had to be done.
And I know the land now is going to revert to a police and fire academy. They're going to move, the land is city owned, and so they've used, I don't know what they'll do with all the pipes, but their goal is to build somebody help me, but an education center. An academy. Yes. Was there another question? Yes.
I had a question. Since that's an airport buffer zone, or was an airport buffer zone, chances are, and I hold your airport is, but it's possible that was actually homes at one time, and the FAA stepped in and bought the land for noise issues. And my question is though, did you have any complaints or any issues with any of the residents during or following with regards to noise issues, having lived there?
I don't recall that, and that's a good question. I've lived in Joplin 30 years, and it was always an empty space, but it could have been. But quite frankly, we had the most grateful residents, really, and the police department, every media outlet wanted to do a story about how bad crime was and people cooking drugs and beating their kids or whatever. And the police officer said that neighborhood does not represent anything different than any other neighborhood in Joplin, America. There is no them doing something out there. And so that was really gracious. And quite frankly, the demographics was probably a lower to moderate income demographics, but we did not see an increase in social problems. Yes?
Okay, you said that it took around 6 months to actually get the trailers established there. Were the residents in shelters for 6 months?
No. Our shelter, and if you were there, please help me with this. Our shelter, the American Red Cross shelter out at the university, it demobilized, I think, about 5 to 6 weeks after. And then we had a high school, Webb City High School, if you remember this part, a town about 7 miles away, took in all the rest of, and it was a handful of people. I mean, it was one large van ride from the university to the neighboring high school. So I think 10 to 12 people were still displaced. Everybody else really did what they call doubling up or moved out into some of the neighboring towns. But a lot of doubling up is what I would, especially with the clientele that we worked with, which was the renters or the homeowners who were not going to be able to build without some kind of benevolence.
They put some in hotels too.
That is true. Well, I was going to say the middle class, our tornado hit where all the doctors and lawyers lived first, and then it went through the shotgun houses. And so a lot of people could afford hotels, their insurance were paying nicely. It's that gap people, you guys know, but the people who weren't insured quite as much. Yes,
Do you
please.
have any idea, as you speak of insurance, what that breakdown was? Did 50% have insurance or 20% have insurance? Do you have any idea?
I don't, but I can get those now. I mean, our state level economic development, she actually moved her office to Joplin for a year. She's the assistant director of, and she kept data like nobody's business, so she might have that. I know for me, even the people we helped with long-term recovery and helped these 1,860 families rebuild their lives, quite a few had insurance as homeowners. It was just uninsured. It was 20 years ago, they bought a $50,000 house, insured it for $50,000, and to rebuild would be a $120,000 house. How am I doing on time? Somebody? Okay, thank you. So again, success in numbers, we completed 1,312 with over 1,312 homes repairs or rebuilds. And I can give you the breakdown, I think it's in that green sheet of paper, with over 1 million hours of volunteer labor. Again, this is a great reason to have a volunteer reception center, is then you can keep track of volunteer numbers. And that used to bug me when people would say that early after our disaster, remember to turn in your report, everybody get your report in. But this is how FEMA paid us also, is by volunteer hours. And also, the day we hit 1 million hours was less than 2 years after the disaster. And I mean, we all sat down and just like, it was February, and we all just went, wow. The world gave us 1 million hours of their time. I mean, that's just, yeah, you just can't even say it. We had those case management coffees that I told you about. We had an agency that was very, again, I work in the counseling social work field. So we had 50,000 individuals learning about prevention. We actually stole a saying from the state of Iowa that says, don't let one disaster lead to another. And we did a huge public awareness campaign about mental health issues, domestic violence, the increase in domestic violence, the increase in substance use. We are right next to Indian reservations, so we have casinos, the increase in gambling, all those risk behaviors. And so that was fabulous that we had that prevention pretty quickly, as well as resources. I mean, we had billboards, we had neighborhood block parties. We were really checking on people to make sure people's stress level didn't move them into abusive kind of behaviors. This was what I love that picture. So May 22nd, we still had 2 weeks of school left, and the schools were decimated, and our superintendent 5 days later said, we will be back in school on August 17th. He had 8 buildings to repair. I work for that man today, Dr. Huff, CJ Huff, great human being. And so everybody said, no way, Jose, can you get ready for school in 78 days? And this was the day, maybe the Saturday before school started. Just a nonprofit in town said, our kids haven't been back together. The last memory they have is the Friday before the tornado. And so this little bitty nonprofit, I mean like one paid employee, organized an event for every kid in the Joplin School District, but what turned out was about 25,000 people, and it was a day of fun. And this is a little guy that they had like, bubbles, soap bubbles, but it was a slip and slide full of soap bubbles, one down to the football field at the university. I mean, crazy stuff. But anyway, this is one of those moments that I think all of us have been holding our breath, and then we got there. And everybody was sure that, at that time, I think everybody was sure that Miley Cyrus was going to come and sing, or I don't know, some famous person. So everybody's saying, oh my God, and me and my kids are up close to the stage, and it was some no-namer. But anyway, it was still fun. It was still fun. You know, everybody's saying, we are all that. We are Joplin, America. Anyway, so one of those words I told you about, the Human Service Campus again, that was a community center that was moved onto the FEMA trailer park and had resources come out Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And then they just had a lot of block parties, carnivals. This is where our faith community, a lot of churches wanted to come in and do, what do we call it during summer? Vacation Bible School, thank you. And so they were like, give us some kids, we'll do Vacation Bible School. Well, we were kind of non-sectarian, so we would say, how about if we do it out here? And they would have great, I mean, like weekly, 2 summers in a row, we had a carnival atmosphere, free food, crafts, and there was some dialogue about the faith. but people drove from the city out to these events. So our faith community, locally as well as nationally, really stepped up and looked after those kiddos while their parents needed to take care of business. And it was a very, very beautiful thing. And we just plugged in everybody we knew instead of recreating the wheel. And our extension office was down the road in the county seat, and we really didn't interact with them because we're not a rural community necessarily, and I think that's what mostly people thought of as the extension office was, how do I grow wheat or corn? But it was perfect. They came in and did that free of charge. We do what? Are you an extension officer?
Weed.
Oh, weed. No, we're into methamphetamine. It's cheaper. You guys are fun. I'm staying. Anyways, it was great to use the extension people, and it wasn't really, somebody connected the dots, and there it happened. We had several, I think 5 cycles, and Habitat then and another place that went from renters to homeowners kind of mandated that their clients come to these workshops. And so we had 20 and 30 people for 5 weeks at a time learning stuff. Again, another fabulous, now we have homeowners in our town that previously weren't homeowners, and we believe they're going to be good neighbors. We taught them some things. And then I wrote a grant with some other people, and we secured a couple grants, and we secured over $1.5 million to actually do some of the rebuilding. I was really impressed with that, except when you think about that it cost about $60,000 to $80,000 to purchase or to build a house. So this money went quite quickly, but to leverage that kind of money was another one of our successes. This is one of those famous street arts. We're now all of a sudden have street art everywhere. So I want to talk, oh gosh, I'm not very far into my talk. I'm going to talk faster. So again, the 4 C's that the National VOAD talks about is cooperation, communication, coordination, collaboration. If you don't have these 4, it's really difficult to help build a community back. So I'm going to briefly talk about these. So under cooperation, again, I've got to tell you this story. So, it's just so neat, because I think you guys might have faith community in your town. I saw some church steeples and stuff. Churches that diametrically oppose each other, the night of the tornado, were calling each other and offering space. So an example is our Latter-day Saint church, the Mormon church. The other church that now is called the Christ Community, or Community of Christ Church, used to be. The LDS church was decimated. And the other church called and said, we're going to open the doors for you. Even though ideology, we're different, we'll open the doors for you. I go to the Episcopal Church, and we're the liberal Episcopals, and there's some conservative Episcopals, and the conservative Episcopal Church was decimated. And we started worshiping Sunday mornings, and then we gave them our church on Sunday afternoons. And just a variety, I could give you goosebumps. The Roman Catholic Church was working with other people. Everybody said, we're not that different, and let's fellowship. Our Christian church has we have a university in town. It's called Ozark Christian College. It's the Christian church, and they open their doors to the Presbyterians. It just ideologically different, but everybody embraced each other. Same with physicians and dentists. I think that's groovy. One of the most important things we did, besides having 1 point of volunteer coordination, is we asked everybody to endorse what we called the fidelity of case management. That means that we were going to do due diligence and we did insurance and income verification through FEMA to make sure that somebody was truly a tornado-affected individual, that they truly did own their home, blah, blah, blah. And again, we had some outliers that would just say, oh, those poor mean people over there won't help you, we'll help you. And we just kept asking people to stick with the fidelity of a case management system, because otherwise you're going to have people who take from the goodness of people. So that was really important. That's our first hospital that had been destroyed. They set up a MASH unit. So communication, that first month, Mary, you were probably in town, and gentlemen back there may have been. There was daily briefings at one spot at 10 o'clock every morning. NGOs are non-governmental organizations, so in my world, that's called all the nonprofits in town, plus then the governmental people would be around. That happened every morning, 10 o'clock, and then at 10:30 or 11, the doors would open, and all those social service agencies would have a booth. And so you could come in and say, I need to reapply for my birth certificate. I need to get shots for my kiddos or whatever. That was really important. The other thing that we did, I think, really well, and with social media as big as it is now, is we found one place, again, that we said, this is the endorsed website, and this is the endorsed Facebook site. It was called Rebuild Joplin. It converted into a construction entity after this, but our Chamber of Commerce, our city, municipality, our county, our school system, and the 2 hospitals all said, we will only post things on Rebuild Joplin's site. This is the place. And so we really wanted to keep it so that there would be one Facebook and one website that anybody could go to. Did anybody ever visit this, Rebuild Joplin? They've used the same logo now in other disaster zones. It'll say Rebuild Des Moines or Rebuild Dallas or whatever. But basically, if you went to it as a website, it would pop up and it'd have 2 buttons, and it says, I was affected or I want to help. And this was built within 5 days after the tornado. And I'll tell you who I love is these guys that were young, 25-year-olds in the corporate world. They built it. And I'm like, what do you guys, I mean, really corporate world. And they're like, well, we want to get back to our community. Well, they did. I mean, it was beautiful. And but anyway, so you have this button that says I was affected, and if you hit it, it would give you a whole laundry list of things to do and first steps on everything. And then there was the button that says, I want to help, and it gave a whole list of, if you want to come, go to the volunteer center. If you want to give money this way. Don't send us any more teddy bears, da-da-da-da-da. But it was beautiful. It was really, really beautiful. Under the I was affected, we had how-to guides, so how to file for your insurance, how to do this. And that's where I wrote some things about how to regain your emotional balance. And so that was, again, where we're putting some words out there. If your kiddos are traumatized, here's what you need to say. If you're traumatized, here's what you need to do, kind of stuff. Most important thing was communication. And there was some outliers, again, and they kind of a little bit got rubbed that they weren't the selected site. It wasn't anything except we needed one site. We just needed to get to one place. I guess I didn't. We also, I'm sorry. Under the Long-Term Recovery Committee, we had hot topics daily. It was just an email blast. More water at First Presbyterian Church. Couches are available at this time. Volunteers are needed over here to plant trees, whatever. We did that daily, probably the first year, and we had a large email distribution. And again, you could feel the ebb and flow of recovery, because after a year, a lot of people said, I'm tired, I'm done, and which was absolutely fine. We went to every other month, or every other week meetings and some other things. We have a long-term recovery Facebook site, and we still, even though we've demobilized, we still put some stuff on there. So if you want to join us, it's kind of, we call it our scrapbook. It's the anthology of Long-Term Recovery Committee in Joplin. But we would post up, again, when we get to the celebrations, we would post up a lot of pictures. So this says May 22nd, 2011, 5:41, 2326 Pennsylvania. The tornado killed the house that stood here, but not my spirit, I believe is the word. God bless and thanks to the volunteers. My home is being rebuilt with the help of Catholic Charities. And so much of our community was like this. So forever grateful for the help that we received. Coordination, again, we eventually started looking at people who were continuing to get food at the points of distribution. Because early on, you just give food, you just do it. And then you start asking, are you a tornado-affected person? What list are you on? What else is happening? And we eventually decided to use what they call Charity Tracker. It really came out of Katrina, and I don't know if anybody's heard of it. It's a free database. Our Ministerial Alliance is using it post-disaster long-term. They've committed to it, so you don't have to wait for a disaster. But it tracks the benevolence. So if I go into Church A today and say I need a bus ticket, and 3 days from now I go into Church B and say I need a bus ticket, they can look me up in Charity Tracker and then make a decision. So it's a decision-based. I'm not a big fan of it, but I will report out that communities do need it. The piece that also we're just developing is really kind of help people setting goals. So if you see that I've come in for food 5 weeks in a row and I'm still in crisis, the next person who sees me on Charity Tracker has an obligation to problem solve with me. What is the root cause of my problem, not just putting a Band-Aid on. So it's a big system. It's free of charge, or $20 a year or something ridiculously cheap. It's called Charity Tracker. that really helped us with coordinating the care and the benevolence. So we had meetings, we had subcommittees, so that's kind of coordination. Here's one of our celebrations, some of the great people that I've gotten a chance to work with over the years. This was our construction volunteer committee, and so what we really tried to do is so they come from different groups, but they would come and say, okay, I have 7 cases, 3 are disabled, 1's a veteran, 1 needs $2,000 repair, the other one needs a full rebuild. And then the other people around the table would also say, well, I've got enough volunteers to do this. Let's decide to do the disabled one first, da-da-da. So we had a problem-solving kind of decision-making tree. It took us a long time to get there because everybody's impatient. Everybody wants to help the first person and hurry, hurry, hurry. And we had to start talking about who needs us the most, and that's really a hard subject. But we had to start prioritizing. Collaboration, the website that I just told you about, we had tons. Our school system only had a 1-month summer school. They committed to all year summer school and Christmas break because they wanted the kiddos to have a normal experience while their parents were stressing out, and they were stressing out. So love all the child care agencies in my town. They did it for free, the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, the school system. Great collaboration there. Our healthcare system and the school system, we are about to have a healthcare clinic in our new high school, really that came about from the tornado. Myself as a mental health social worker, I'm in the school system for the first time. I have 15 employees that we still serve the kiddos that are distraught when they come to school. It's not really much about the tornado anymore. As I was telling Richard and Gina, it's the secondary effects of a tornado. So the families who lived in the margins before the tornado, if they've not recouped and they're economically more down the road, the stress is terrible and the kids feel it. Or it may be that their dog died and they still don't have a new dog. So anyway, those are great collaborations, mental health providers. We did some data with the city to show, like I said, out of the FEMA trailers, people kind of tended to think the sky is falling, oh my God, we're going to have all these social problems. And we did some, I have a sister who's an epidemiologist, and so she came into town and did some social epidemiology post 9 months, post tornado 9 months, and we reflected, really, did we have more divorces? Did we have more suicides? We did have a small increase in suicide, but not astronomical. We went from 34 suicides in 1 year before the tornado to 43 the next year. So at 9, I mean, proportionally it sounds big, but it was nine people. And we only found 1 that was connected to the tornado itself. The other 8 were not connected. Anyway, so we had, that coordination is important, not to do your own rodeo, and everybody's doing their own rodeo is not a good thing. And so lastly, to celebrate. This young man right here is our Habitat for Humanity director, a good friend of mine. This is a Habitat house. This is the grandma and her child who received this house. Tears well up in my eye. I tried to hit every benevolence organization. At one time there was about 12 kinds of construction in our town. The Mennonites, fabulous people that will build and want no attention, and then there was all these other places. And so as the chairperson, I tried to go to at least one open house of every person or every entity, and every entity, whether they were faith-based or not, they would read a Bible scripture, they would sign the Bible, they would give the Bible to the family, they would bless the house, they would ask the family to speak. Lives were changed by volunteers. Jeff, when you spoke earlier, I mean, I can't underestimate it. I'll tell a quick story. When it was this man's turn to talk about his house being rebuilt, Samaritan's Purse, the orange people, had built his home. And he talked about this group of 12-step AA men who had come from Virginia, and they helped him build his house. And he talked about how he had been secretly drinking excessively, but was before the tornado and during the rebuild. And he was so scared, and those people 12-stepped him into AA. They helped him get clean and sober. And the day that I was there, and he was talking, and he had his kids on both arms, and he said, I got a house, but what I got better than a house is I've got a life worth living. And he had been sober 6 months. And it was because these men from Virginia when they came to build his house, they spoke this language of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so it rubbed off on him. They really didn't set him down and say, you got to do it our way. It rubbed off on him. Now, is that a beautiful story? I mean, it's like, oh. Anyway, that gives me goosebumps to talk about it. So for more information, what do you know, I am at the end. Oh, yes, Richard.
Where did you, for lack of a better word, house all the volunteers that came to town?
So we had one church that's kind of an independent Pentecostal church called Joplin Family Worship Center. It was about 3 miles east of town. I call it, they had a parking lot, but I called it the tarmac. It had more semi-trucks on it. But they became housing a volunteer. We had 3 other churches that, well, we currently still have 3 churches. And then we had probably 5 others that were kind of small outliers. So city code says you can't do that. City code says you can't house people in a church if there's not fire extinguishers and smoke alarms and all that. And so the city was tried to work with this, but they said, why don't you tell us, what if you publicly say volunteers can be housed at 1809 Connor? We have an obligation to make sure it's safe there. And so that was one of our hardest things. And we ended up writing a $50,000 grant, and we brought 3 churches up to code. So long term, they are ready for volunteer housing after the fact. I mean, they're still housing people, but
They sleep on cots? Or
they have dormitory style cots, and then they prepare meals. One church, again, the tarmac place, serves meal. They decided just to have a lunch for anybody, so volunteers as well as tornado affected. They're still doing that daily, so just people on the street can come in and eat. They have not stopped the race. They are still running the race. A lot of us have said we're 98% done, we're going to be done. That church is still doing that, and then 2 other churches have been brought up to code. This being spring break, probably both of those are still housing volunteers. Typically about 30 to 40 volunteers stay in each place. But we had to bring it up to
You
code.
still have volunteers working today?
We do. Although the long-term recovery committee closed down November of this past year, we knew there was a few families outside of disaster case management. Again, we tried to stick with the fidelity that we were only going to help people who went through disaster case management. There was the Facebook site and website that I spoke of, Rebuild Joplin. They actually also became a construction entity based on St. Bernard Project out of New Orleans that has a national reputation. They decided to also work with people who would not use disaster case management. So they are continuing to build and repair, but as the long-term recovery committee, we stood down with less than 8 families. And we've still helped them. We still have our checking account. We just quit having meetings. And Rebuild Joplin had something in the newspaper today. That's how I know that there was volunteers in town, kids from universities, and they hope to repair an additional 45 houses before they're done in August. They have enough AmeriCorps. They have like 50 AmeriCorps to be committed till August. So they have found repairs that still need to be done. So anyway, if you want to know more, we have a Facebook, and like I said, I call it my scrapbook. We also, there was 50 of us in a community that wrote a book. Shannon has the book. You can get it free online, but it's called Joplin Pays It Forward. And we were all tasked with writing one small chapter. I think it was 1,500 words. Can you imagine me only writing 1,500 words? Anyway, but it has 50 chapters from the whole gamut. So emergency management, the public school system, the hospitals, the for-profits, the non-profits, myself in this disaster work. We all wrote a chapter. We really want to give that to the world. It costs 99 cents if you want it in ebook form. If you just want it to read online or print it off, you can do it from this Joplin, chamberofcommerce.com, and it's called Joplin Pays It Forward. Yes?
Do you get the money from the ebook?
I do
Who
not.
gets-
That's a good
Does it go to
question.
the organization?
It's a really good question. Jane Cage is kind of my peer that has started right after the tornado, Miss Cage, and she's gotten a lot of national recognition. In fact, she got the first FEMA award for volunteerism. She kind of organized the macro recovery in Joplin. Where do we want paths and parkways and parks and new she buildings and all that? And she organized this, so I'm wondering if she has a donation center for this 99 cents.
I think Britt has.
Brittany had a
questions.
call.
Oh, yes, please.
The disaster case management system that you're referring to, is that like a specific system that you all use? Or are you referring to like the Red Cross system and FEMA and multiple agencies coming together and putting?
It was
that
actually,
together?
great question, it was actually funded, and so it was a contract through FEMA, so it was very specific who could do what. It was familiar to Red Cross and Catholic Charities and Sal Army, because they've always done informal or, some kind of case management, but this was very specific. So they had to use what they call the CAN system. If you've heard of the CAN system, boy, we did not like it at first. But it's a data tracking system, and it gets people through the system. But it was very formalized. UMCOR, which is the United Methodist Corps.
Committee on Relief.
Thank you. They were the trainers. Karen Benson is the state trainer in the state of Missouri, and so it was a very formalized case management training. A lot to do with CAN, but also people skills.
And then one other question.
Sure.
You said that you all had distributed about $200,000. With that, how was that distributed? Was it distributed through agencies? And you mentioned like couches and things like that. Was that paid directly to vendors, or was that money funneled through the actual clients?
No, it was direct to vendors, but we let the clients pick. So we had 8 furniture stores in town, and if they said, I like this couch, we would let the case. We never met with the clients. We always had redacted numbers because small town America, you don't need to know who's getting the couch and who's not. So we used our case management system, and the case managers, what we would do, because like I said, I endorsed or authorized funding up to $1,000, is we would ask them sometimes to give us 3 bids and which one was the preference of the client. And rarely did we go against that. I mean, if the client wanted a brown couch and the blue couch was cheaper, we'd say, go ahead and get the brown couch. So, but it went directly to the vendor. It went to the furniture store. The only time it didn't was this church that I call the Tarmac. They wanted to do what we called Wheels for Workers, which was finding rehab automobiles for people. And they wanted the client to have the car title. And they wanted us to purchase that at times. And we just felt really uncomfortable. So we did not enter into that. We did not feel like we wanted to purchase a car title and give it to a client. And so the church decided, we only did it 3 times, the church decided to hold the title. And so we helped pay for 3 cars, but the church held the title until the client worked it off or whatever, if that makes sense. We were not, that was really stretching it for us. Yes, Jen?
What about pets and animals? And some people won't leave their home unless they can take their dog with them. What happened with that?
We actually, the ASPCA came to town right after the tornado. A lot of it was matching pets back with their homeowners, but also we had lots of adoptions going on. I guess the famous one is the guy from the Weather Channel, Bettis. Rick Bettis? Mike Bettis. He has a dog named Joplin or something, I don't know. He found a dog in Joplin when he was there the day after the tornado, and that dog, he took a dog home and adopted a dog. Mike Bettis says that periodically on the Weather Channel. But there was a great, again, I'm always amazed that there are systems in place. You don't really have to invent very much, you just have to know who to contact to get that system to your town. And the ASPCA came and was at our Humane Society for a week and a half maybe, and really organized that. I don't recall anybody saying that they wouldn't move because of their dog or not, but we always, again, those case managers were so good to filter out and really get to know each client and their family and their circumstances that we worked a lot of. I remember a lady, we never had dishwashers in those FEMA trailers. They just didn't have dishwashers, but we had a lady who was disabled, something with her legs and diabetes, and she couldn't stand for long. So we bought a temporary dishwasher for her because that's the right thing to do, kind of thing. So, but I don't remember specifics other than that.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I know I went too long, I'm sorry.
Do you have any special shelters for persons that are disabled, or I guess, disabled and lost their home?
My counterpart that I keep talking about actually runs our independent living center, which is the ADA program in town that is for the least restricted environments. And she's now really been speaking nationally about what we did right and what we didn't do right. There were adaptive devices in a lot of our group homes and nursing homes. So for the hearing impaired, there were red lights that flashed for tornado warnings in some of those systems. Post-tornado, we did not have a specialized place for people with disabilities or needing concerns. Quite frankly, 3 of our nursing homes were destroyed and a couple of our group homes were destroyed. So people left town, and nursing home residents were driven as far away as 90 miles away to find another bed. So our first concern was not, we did not do accommodations immediately. But since that time, a great deal of funding has come in and a great deal of awareness of adaptations for disasters and being sensitive. That as well as children. We had a lot of people come in and study what we did right and what we could have improved on with children in disaster. A lot of suggestions. For example, the FEMA trailer park had no playground, and our FEMA Laura Lee Casole, which her specialization is children and disabled, I believe, Laura Lee insisted that if we were going to have 586 families living together, that there would be at least one playground. And so oftentimes in disasters, we think like adults and think about the adult life. And she immersed in that child focus. And Stephanie Brady, my counterpart, was very sensitive to the needs of anybody with special needs. This was our final goodbye for Long-Term Recovery Committee. We had a big celebration. So this was all the data that we had collected. There's a great poem at the end of it that I really believe in. It sustained us through our Long-Term Recovery Committee. Every month that we had a meeting on the 22nd, because I was the emotional spiritual person, I always brought in a platitude and read about it and kept the group moving forward. And so I'm going to read to you one of them that I think is so meaningful. It's from a lady named Marianna Williamson, and it's called Our Greatest Fear. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were born to manifest the glory of God that is within each of us. And it's not just in some of us, it's in every one of us. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we liberate ourselves from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And I think that's what the gifts of volunteers do for people. So God bless you all, and thank you for listening to my story. And if you came to Joplin, if you prayed for Joplin, if you donated to Joplin, on behalf of my town, thank you very much.